The Roman Empire had fallen. The Roman Emperor fell while defending his capital. What remained of the Roman state and people after the Ottomans conquered Constantinople? What survived, and for how long? We'll find out in this video, where we tie up the Palaiologos story and Eastern Rome summarized. Then I'll make a Trebizond summarized series and gladly relate to you how the dynasty of the Comneni lasted even longer as a Roman political institution, despite being even more disadvantaged than the Palaiologi in Constantinople. Let's first mop up the mess in Constantinople after May 29, 1453. Emperor Constantinos XI Palaiologos' body could never be found, but Mehmed II didn't need to see his enemy's corpse to confirm that he indeed achieved his lifelong dream of taking the Queen of Cities. The Turk was now its master by conquest, and since Constantinople fell by storm and not submission, the victorious Muslim army had the right to pillage it with no restraint for 3 days. Mehmed's soldiers at first slaughtered any Roman they met, then realized the wealth of the world's greatest city and its inhabitants, so they began despoiling the timeless churches and monuments of Constantinople. These testaments to Roman civilization were now robbed of their treasures. As to the greatest of them all, the Hagia Sophia, a few Romans were still conducting liturgy in it when Turks barged in and enslaved them. Who knows what would have happened to this most marvelous cathedral itself, if not for the intervention of Mehmed, who was so dazzled by the masterpiece of Justinian that he ordered it converted to a mosque. The Sultan was an appreciator of fine things, so he strolled through the city admiring its buildings, while his less refined troops continued their plunder for 3 days. Then once the smoke cleared, Mehmed had to decide what to do with the old order in Constantinople. The secular elements he overtook. He absorbed what he liked about Roman administration and retained Roman advisors, but the old Roman and Christian elite he got rid of. Most notable is the fate of Lucas Notaras, Constantinos XI's Mezazon, and most important Roman official. He was executed, most probably because the Sultan took his Roman emperor lark too far and he thought he should get a Greek twink, like imperatores of old. And Lucas put his son, Jacob, caught his eye. Lucas, of course, refused to hand over his boy to be Mehmed's toy, so he was conveniently killed. Jacob entered the Sultan's harem, but his sister, Anna, had already fled to Venice to carry on the family legacy. She avoided the fate of many noble Roman ladies after the sack of the city. They were sent into harems of Ottoman officials or sold into slavery for the most part. A great number of the citizens also escaped to the west with their treasures and priceless books of ancient knowledge, further depriving the city of its cultured inhabitants. The stories of the Roman refugees in Europe are all fascinating, and I'll get to them sometime, but not now. Regarding ecclesiastical elements, Mehmed kept them pretty much untouched, to his credit. When Constantinople fell, it had no patriarch, as he was repulsed by the anti-Unionists all the way to Italy. Now that Constantinople fell, what matter of union was there? Quite a few Orthodox rejoiced to learn that they could keep their customs under the Turks. Georgios Scholarios, the anti-Unionist philosopher who fought with the Unionist Isidoros of Kiev even when the Ottomans bombarded the city, was chosen by Mehmed as his new patriarch, Gennadius II. The first Ottoman patriarch of Constantinople also received the important responsibility of looking after his Roman flock, now without a political ruler. The Romans who didn't abandon their homeland and stayed became the Rumilet, a millet being how the Ottomans organized communities of conquered people. The patriarch was the head of the Rumilet, replacing the emperor as the leader of the Roman people. The stories of the Ottoman Rum are equally fascinating as that of the diaspora, and I'll get to them too, sometime in the future. For now, I really had to elaborate on the fate of Constantinople because it answers a question a lot of you have. Why, despite having a dazzling secular civilization, do we only associate Byzantines with the Orthodox Church now? And that is your answer. When the only way to preserve your Romanism, your Romeosini, is to stick to the Church, then the Church becomes the foremost symbol of Eastern Rome. Or, if you won't escape and still don't want to live as a second-class citizen in the Millet, the last option for conquered Romans was to become a Turk. Convert to Islam, pay less taxes, suffer less prejudices. This tinted a lot of the room. So we'll explore what happened to the yet unconquered Romans in the Morea. In 1453, Despots Demetrios and Thomas Palaiologos were busy dealing with the revolt. The Morea exchanged its exceptional despot, Constantinos, for these imbeciles. Well, Thomas was okay when he partnered with Constantinos. He was capable, but now, co-ruling with the faithless Demetrios, he became just as useless. If you remember from last episode, Turahan Beg invaded Morea for the gazillionth time, and he was only beaten back by Matthäus Asin, Demetrios' brother-in-law. Everyone could see how incompetent their despots were, and the Albanian immigrants especially despised the petty despots for their weakness. They hailed the Lord of Mani, Manuel Cantacuzínos, great-grandson of the famous first despot of Morea, Manuel Cantacuzínos, whose smooth reign made the sources so quiet, as their new despot. Meanwhile, the bastard son of the last prince of Achaea also led revolt. The former took over Demetrios' part of the despotate, while the latter caused havoc for Thomas. The despots couldn't even crush the revolts as a team, let alone in their state of non-cooperation. So they did the only thing they could: beg Mehmed to enforce order. The Sultan sent Turahan Bey in 1454 to help the despots police the realm, and the rebels were suppressed. If you're wondering why Mehmed didn't just conquer the last Roman polity, well, he knew the despots were absolute jokes and posed no threat. Better keep them around and pay tribute. Life went on in the Morea. Asin, the only capable military man in the despotate, became Lord of Corinth. Thomas the Latinophile and Demetrius the Turcophile kept hating each other, though they both hoped to restore the Roman Empire and be crowned the successor of their martyred brother. Thomas sent many embassies to the west, where there was some sympathy for Constantinople, and a crusade almost took place. In 1456, Thomas sent his envoy, the respected scholar Ioannis Argyropoulos, who stayed in Italy to teach Greek like many other Renaissance Roman exiles before dying from eating too much watermelons? Okay. Demetrios, usually very anti-Latin, also tried this and sent his own envoy, refusing to join Thomas' men. Meanwhile, Turahan Bey's son conquered all of the Duchy of Athens except for the Acropolis, which would fall 2 years later. This time, Mehmed personally came to receive the surrender of Athens in 1458, and he visited the city like a tourist before moving south towards the Morea. Apparently, the despots' incompetence stopped being so funny when they failed to collect enough tribute, and with their plotting with the West, Mehmed had enough. He led his army to besiege Corinth, whose ruler, Asin, was away, and the citizens put up a stiff resistance themselves. Mehmed left a siege force, while he ravaged other parts of the Morea, notably in the more Latinophile Thomas portion. Asin returned to Corinth and relieved his city, but even this capable general couldn't hold out once Mehmed returned. Corinth surrendered. The Sultan respected Asin, so he let him carry his terms to the despots, who agreed and ceded the northern Peloponnese to him. Thomas sulked. He almost lost all his lands, and now Demetrios was getting alliances with the Sultan. Unacceptable. The despots fought again, egged on by the lords in the Morea. In 1459, once Thomas got a few Latin troops from the Pope, he attacked Ottoman Morea with little success, and so he invaded Demetrios' lands, taking Mani. The Turks came for Thomas, but plague decimated them. So it was a golden opportunity to have peace again. The brothers then reconciled falsely as the Moreans had enough. But then Demetrios broke the peace over a few forts and they fought again in 1460. Mehmed had enough and went to the Morea to meet Demetrios, who chickened out and sent Asin instead. That was the last straw from his hopeless vassals. Mehmed simply occupied Mistra on 29th May 1460, exactly 7 years after the fall of Constantinople. The despotate ended. The capital fell, and other cities followed. Demetrios was pissing himself with fear when Mehmed met him outside Mistra, only to find him smiling and offering him the appanage of Imbros and Limnos to compensate for the loss of his lands. Elsewhere, Some Morean cities resisted, but most capitulated once they saw inhumane massacres by Zaganos Pasha, which disgusted even Mehmed. Monemvasia submitted to papal protection on Thomas' advice, and later Venice would take over. The last cities free of Ottoman control or all Venetian possessions, and Roman refugees fled there en masse, including Thomas and his family, who soon fled to the west. The Pope very happily received them and offered them pensions. In the Morea, one last fort stood defiant to the Turks, Salmenikon, the castle of the aptly named Konstantinos Graitzas Palaiologos. Mehmed and his janissaries had to personally lead the siege before Graitzas surrendered in July 1461, 8 years after his namesake had perished fighting for Constantinople. So, is that the end of all Roman presence in the Peloponnese? No. These resilient Romi still had one last foothold, Mani. The Ottomans were too scared to face its fierce inhabitants and its harsh mountains, so they just let it be in return for some tribute. These scary people were the Maniotes, who claimed descent from ancient Sparta. If we look only at their temper, we might believe that. They had always been very independent in the Roman Empire. According to Constantinos VII Porphyrogenitus, some of them practiced pagan religion until the 10th century. Vardunia, in the north of the Mani Peninsula, formed the buffer between autonomous Mani and the Turks. In 1461, Krokodeilos Kladas, a Laconian, was made the lord of Vardunia by the Ottomans in hopes of letting him subdue Mani, but they were to be disappointed. Elsewhere in the Greek world, the empire of Trebizond fell. Its story I will tell soon. And some Venetian and Genoese colonies like Naxos and Lesbos also fell prey to the Turks. Venice had enough and declared war in 1463, fighting on multiple fronts with the Ottomans, but mostly in the Peloponnese, where Kladas gladly helped them with his warlike Maniates, until Venice surrendered in 1479. The war saw the fall of Venetian Negroponte and of the Despotate of Epirus under the Tokos. I do not consider Epirus to be a Roman state after its conquest by Serbs and Italians, so I won't use 1479 as an end date for the Roman Empire. But it was still a significant loss. However, Kladas and the Maniates refused to surrender, and their former Venetian allies betrayed them. They carried on resisting the Turks on their own, even scoring a major success against a much larger Ottoman army in 1481. But Kladas was captured and flayed alive in 1490. And thus ended the Maniate spirit of independence. No, I'm joking. They never did let that fire inside them die down. Throughout the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, they egged Russian and Western rulers on to war against the Ottomans. Although once they got Catherine the Great of Russia involved and started the Orlov Revolt in 1770, that ended up in a huge suppression. Many lives were lost, and the Morea was devastated by Ottoman Albanian irregulars. But the Maniates got further recognition and their own base of money. More importantly, seeds of the Greek Revolution were also planted. The Bay of Mani would welcome many Greek irregulars, the Klefts and Armatoli, main forces of the soon-to-happen revolution, to take refuge in Mani. Once the revolution broke out in 1821, the Maniates were among the first to join, and one of their own, Theodoros Kolokotronis, nicknamed the Nobleman of the Morea, would lead the Morean Klefts to many victories during the war. But that's a summary of the history of Roman Mani. I hope you liked it, and I'll wrap this episode up by discussing the fate of the last despots of the Morea. Demetrios chilled in his appanage with his wife and brother-in-law Asen until 1467, when supposedly Asen cheated the Turks over salt trade profits on their islands and Mehmed banished Demetrios. He died as a monk in 1470 and his line ended. Vamas and his family were well received in Rome, but they were nothing more than fancy beggars living off papal money. He died in 1465. His claims to the Morea, and later even Constantinople, were inherited by his eldest son, Andreas, who tried to restore the empire but ended up spending all his money and had to sell his title to Spain. He still died in poverty in 1502. His younger brother Manuel fled back to serve the Ottomans and converted to Islam. Thomas' daughters fared better than his sons. Helena married a prince of Serbia, while Zoe married Ivan III of Russia, and their marriage gave Russia, the only independent and mighty Orthodox state left, pretensions of seeing themselves as a third Rome. But that is the fate of the Palaiologos dynasty, the last imperial Roman dynasty. They branched out quite a lot through diplomatic marriages, like the Comneni, and quite a few European nobles could claim some descent from them. But to trace the lives of all these Palaiologolings would be tedious, and you're not here for that, are you? It took me 3 years, but there we go. I summarized the whole of Eastern Roman history. Excuse my latest episodes for getting so much longer, but the Palaiologi were just a very active and wordy bunch. Even with this length, I am still summarizing stuff only. This was quite the journey, for the Romans and for me. I'd like to thank you all for following me on the story of the Roman Empire in the East from start to finish. And please remember that the Q&A I announced last time is still ongoing. Just submit any questions you got about Eastern Roman history and I'll answer them in an upcoming video. And don't fret, my channel is far from done and there is still so much to explore. Trebizond and Theodoros' story, the stories of the Romans who survived trouble fought in the far eastern edges of the empire, will duly be covered. I also mentioned that I go over the history and lives of the Roman diaspora in Western Europe and the Rumillet which stayed in the Ottoman Empire at times. And we'll also be exploring how Romans from the whole empire, from Britain to Egypt, preserved their Romanitas to varying degrees following their respective conquests. Additionally, I'll of course be making other content in the meantime about all aspects of Eastern Roman culture, history, and intellectual achievements, etc., etc. Hopefully I could upload more frequently though. Anyway, that's all from me for now. Thank you all so much, and now I customarily thank my patrons. Dragonlord, A Happy Magpie, Rompea King Projects, Cody Damroth, Deropita Productions, Francis Morin, and Archduke Romelinios Demos. Thank you all so much.